Chapter 6, Dork in Disguise. The professional jeans ripper said one of the coolest places for a rip is just above the knee. Brenda sat cross-legged on the floor in Jerry's room, staring at Jerry's pant leg. Sassy sat next to her. Let's mark it right here, she said. She drew a line with a piece of chalk above Jerry's left knee. And let's rip the other leg too. She marked it. Another place for a rip. And the woman said, "This is extremely cool. Is on the thigh just below the pocket." Jerry nodded. Let's start with the rips above the knees. Okay, Brenda said. Go take them off. I'm going to start the rip with the seam ripper. Jerry went into the bathroom, changed out of his jeans into a different pair, returned, and handed the jeans to Brenda. Okay, she opened an inch-long slit in the fabric with the sharp instrument. She grinned at Jerry. Ready? To let her rip? Rip away, Jerry said. Then I get to do the next one. Brenda dug her fingers into the fabric and pulled. The rip made a soft ripping sound. Brenda held up the jeans. What do you think? That's the coolest rip I've ever seen, Jerry answered. Nodding with a big grin on his face, Brenda laughed. Let me try one, Jerry said. Okay, Brenda said, but let's not make these rips symmetrical. We'll put this one right over the knee. Jerry used the seam ripper to start it. Ready? He called out and yanked on the fabric. Let her rip. He held it up. How'd I do? Brenda beamed. An excellent rip if I ever saw one. Yeah, she said dramatically, taking the jeans from him, is the ultimate in cool rips. I congratulate you on your work of art. She grinned at him. Jerry gazed at her. She had a nice smile. It was good to be away from school and all the pressure to act cool. I'll pull out some of the threads around the rips so they look natural, Brenda said. Now we should fray the jeans at the hem. How do we do that? Got any coarse sandpaper? I think so. In the garage. I'll get it. Sassy trotted with Jerry out to the garage and back. When they returned to his room, Jerry found Brenda looking through his science magazines. This is great, she said. Yeah, Jerry said. I'm going to build the hovercraft on page 23. Brenda turned several pages. It lifts you off the floor with just a vacuum cleaner motor. I'm going to get the motor after school tomorrow. Cool. Here's the sandpaper. Jerry handed it to her. Brenda put down the magazine and began sanding away at the hem of one leg. You work on the other leg. When we're done, we'll bleach the jeans. Jerry sat on the floor next to her and worked. Brenda sanded a few minutes before she spoke again. I realized something this morning about Gabe and the other guys, she said. You ever notice how they move? They don't just walk, they strut. Jerry looked up at her. I hadn't really thought about it, but you're right. Brenda went on. Gabe's head bobs a little, and there's some shoulder movement. It's a lot like a jock walk, only cockier. He walks like he has huge biceps, with his arms swinging away from his body so he won't get chafed. Gabe doesn't have big biceps, Jerry said. Exactly, Brenda said. He's such a phony. Why don't you try it? You mean now? Sure. Come on, you can do it. Brenda said, walk in the door and make an entrance. Jerry walked normally out of the room, followed by Sassy. He squinted at himself in the mirror at the end of the hall and took 3 practice steps while Sassy watched calmly. Jerry's reflection was blurry, but he was sure his walk didn't look cool. I don't think I'm ready to try it yet, he said. I promise not to laugh, Brenda called out from his room. I'll give you some tips on what to do to look more like Gabe. He took a deep breath. Okay. Jerry bobbed his head and walked into the room. Swinging his shoulders and arms, Sassy trotted along next to him. Brenda watched him, frowning. You're not really strutting. You're more like parading. Okay, then you do it, Jerry said. Brenda got up. I don't know if I can. She grimaced, concentrating hard, took a deep breath, then walked across the room with the best swaggering strut Jerry had ever seen. Man, you're good, he said. Really? Yeah, do it again. I'll analyze your movements. She did. You lead with your shoulders, Jerry said, and your arms swing away from your body, kind of like a gorilla. Brenda grinned. So as not to get chafed from any swinging biceps. Now you try. Now I'll practice on my own. No, I'll practice on my own later. We should schedule a strut watch before school tomorrow. Brenda settled down next to him on the floor. Every guy has his own style. Maybe you can pick some pointers by observing a bunch of guys when they don't know they're being watched. Yeah, I'll meet you at 7:40 next to the big oak. The cool guys do a lot of strutting around that tree. She grinned. That's where I first saw you. Jerry gazed at Brenda, and that smile again. Her eyes crinkled a little at the edges, giving her a mischievous, fun look. Okay, he said, smiling back. 7:40, I'll be there. The next morning, Jerry pulled on his new torn jeans and looked into the mirror. He squinted. He grabbed his glasses off the bureau, put them on, and gazed into the mirror again. The jeans looked cool, like something a rock star would. Guy. Wear. Faded and torn with a couple of loose threads hanging from the rips above the knees. The hems were worn and frayed. Brenda had done an excellent job. The jeans were, in a word, cool, remarkably so. Next, Jerry pulled on a Hard Rock Cafe t-shirt that his aunt had bought him. His costume was complete. He tossed his glasses back on the bureau, picked up his backpack, and headed downstairs for breakfast. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Hi, Squirt. They looped to the kitchen cabinet and pulled out a box of Cheerios. Tell Jerry not to call me, Squirt, Melissa said. She leaned over her cereal bowl, milk running down her chin. It's a sign of affection, Jerry's mom told her. No, it's not, Jerry said. Mrs. Flack looked up at Jerry and did a double take. Where did you get those jeans? Mr. Flack looked up from the magazine he was reading and stared at Jerry's knees, his eyes wide. I got 'em from you, Jerry told his mom, last week. He poured the cereal into the bowl. They're ruined. Brenda and I fixed them. Now they have character. They have air vents, Jerry's dad observed over the magazine. Comfortable in the warm weather, but a bit chilly come winter. But think of the money I spent, Mrs. Flack said. She walked around Jerry, examining his jeans from different angles. They were brand new jeans, and now they looked ready to throw away. Could you iron on patches? Mr. Flack asked. Jerry gawked at his dad. You're kidding, right? Geez, he thought. No wonder he was a dork. It came through the jeans and neatness would brand him for eternity. The biggest dork in the universe. His dad shrugged. He's kidding. I know he's kidding, Jerry mumbled to reassure himself. He turned to his mom. I could use a couple more pairs. He went to the refrigerator for milk. Buy the stonewashed jeans. It'll save us some work. No way, Jerry, his mother said. I'm not buying brand new jeans so you can ruin them. She ran a hand through her hair, exasperated. Then she gazed at him keenly. Why aren't you wearing your glasses? I don't need them. He does too, Melissa said. He couldn't even see the digits I held up yesterday. She held up 3 fingers. How many? Jerry ignored her. I have to go to school a little early. I'm meeting Brenda. Can you see the blackboard at school? Mrs. Flack asked. Sure. Just not what's written on it, Melissa said. I want to see those glasses on your face when you leave this morning, Mrs. Flack said. Jerry shrugged. Okay, he knew if he only wore them from the front door until he was a block away, he wouldn't have dents on his nose, and his mom would be satisfied. No problem. Everything was cool. Brenda nudged Jerry. Here comes the master strutter. They leaned against the tall oak and watched Gabe, followed by Tony, wind his way around the clusters of kids who waited outside the school. Once again, heads turned as they moved through the crowd. Gabe's walk is like yours last night, Jerry said. Brenda grinned. Thanks. You're right. He leads with his head like a rooster. Tony's strut is different, though. But look at how he holds his hands, bent forward at the wrists and swinging ahead of him. Hey, Flack. Craig stepped in front of Jerry. Hi, Fladkey, Jerry said. We're all playing street hockey after school at Gabe's house. Want to come? Jerry faltered. What should he say? He couldn't say he was going to go buy a vacuum cleaner motor for a science project. That was too dorky. And he certainly couldn't admit that he couldn't skate after lying about it yesterday. I had to go buy a new pair of skates. Mine are worn out. Cool. What kind are you getting? I'm not sure yet. Jerry didn't look at Brenda, but he wished she wasn't here. He felt self-conscious telling lies in front of her. You getting them for stunts or hockey? Gabe and Tony suddenly appeared at Craig's side with Cinnamon and Robin. I haven't decided yet, Jerry said. I do both. Jerry suddenly felt very warm and his face tingled. Craig laughed. I can't wait to see you skate, man. You must be awesome. I've been told that, Jerry said, forcing a smile. Sweat bloomed under his arms. Geez, the lies were really piling up. He told 4 lies in just a few seconds. Cinnamon looked at Jerry with interest. He was glad he was wearing his cool ripped jeans. Maybe she'd look at his clothes and not notice he was starting to get the shakes. You playing street hockey with us, Flack? Gabe asked. Sorry, I've been sidelined for a while, Jerry said, hoping they noticed his football player metaphor. Maybe some other time. How about tomorrow? Gabe asked. He leveled his gaze at Jerry. Jerry flinched under Gabe's stare. Off to see. You name the time, Gabe said. Okay, Jerry said, looking away. I'll have to check my calendar. You do that, Gabe turned and swaggered away with his admiring fans following. Brenda stepped close to Jerry and asked in a low voice, Did you get the feeling Gabe knows you're lying? Yeah, Jerry said. He let out a breath. Me too. What are you going to do? I don't know, Jerry said. I was going to buy the vacuum cleaner motor after school for my science project, but maybe I should buy skates instead. Is that what you want? No, I want to build that hovercraft, but maybe if I learned how to rollerblade, it would take you months of constant practice to get good enough to play street hockey with those guys, Brenda said. Yeah, I guess you're right. He didn't want to learn how to rollerblade. He wanted to build that cool hovercraft. Besides, a guy could get killed on rollerblades. He looked at Brenda, and she returned his gaze sympathetically. It seemed as if the lies he'd been spinning lately were getting tangled around his feet. They hadn't succeeded in tripping him yet, but he'd have to watch his step very, very carefully from here on. We're going to begin with the elements of stories, Miss Robertson said. Who can tell me what the setting is? It's what I'm doing now, Gabe called out. Setting at my desk. The class broke up. Jerry saw the opportunity for comedy and grabbed it. Just like setting hens. Careful, Gabe. You don't want broken eggs on your pants. He looked at Miss Robertson. Excuse me, that was a foul joke. Brenda, Aubrey, Chad, and a few others burst out laughing. Miss Robertson laughed too. The rest of the room was silent. Carrie, who sat across the aisle from him, sighed loudly and rolled her eyes. You're quite a punster, Jerry, Miss Robertson said. The heat rose in Jerry's face. Wasn't his comment funny? He slid down a few inches in his Chair, Jerry said. Miss Robertson, will you please what the story really is? She looked at him expectantly. Jerry knew the answer, but saying it would just make everything worse. I don't know, he mumbled. A dark-haired girl raised her hand. It's when and where the story takes place. That's right, Miss Robertson said. The setting is an important element of stories and novels. Just think about The Wizard of Oz and how the story begins on a little farm in Kansas. It's a quite a contrast to the magical land of Oz that Dorothy dreams about. I liked all the little people in the movie, Robin said. The Wicked Witch of the West is my personal favorite, Gabe said sarcastically. The girls laughed. And that brings us to characterization, said Miss Robertson. What would the Wizard of Oz be without all of those wonderful characters? Innocent Dorothy, the evil witch, the wizard, who wasn't really a wizard at all. He wasn't a real wizard, Gabe cried out, pretending dismay. No one ever told me. Loud laughter filled the room. Gabe, remember what I said yesterday, Miss Robertson told him. I'd like to hear your comments, but only if they contribute. Jerry turned to Gabe. She doesn't want any more flack, he said. She's got enough of that with me. The class laughed this time, and so did Miss Robertson. Teacher's pet, Robin murmured, loud enough so the whole class heard. Jerry squinted back at Gabe, who glared at him. He turned around and slid down farther in his seat. How did Gabe always know what was funny and cool and what wasn't? Quickness running in his veins. Jerry had the terrible feeling that by the time he learned everything about being cool, the kids would have figured out what he really was. Just a dork in disguise.